Hi everyone. I wanted to take this opportunity to tell you about the various readouts that will show on the dash for the driver of the Ford Maverick, and I wanted to discuss how much can you really trust those numbers. Should you trust them? What sort of margin for error might there be? Some of this may seem like common sense. Other pieces may be new to some of you. But if you get at least one positive thing out of this and it helps you with your Ford Maverick or perhaps another vehicle, then it makes it worthwhile to me. So I hope that you enjoy this video. All right, the first thing is pretty simple. It's the temperature readout. So it says 84 degrees Fahrenheit in the top right corner there of the display screen. Now, if your vehicle has been sitting out in the sun for a while, that can be completely erroneous. So it may say 100 degrees, for example, and in actuality it's only 91. So because of that, I recommend, if you really, for whatever reason, need to know a more accurate temperature outside, obviously there's lots of ways you can find that out, but if you want your truck to show the correct temperature, drive it for at least 5 minutes, and then you can get a pretty good idea of what the actual temperature is. Because when your truck is heating up in the sun, all that heat is permeating into the temperature sensor, and you can end up with a completely erroneous level of heat, much higher than in actuality. Now in cold weather, it's not so much of an issue, but nonetheless, to get the most accurate reading, I recommend driving for about 5 minutes, let the airflow go through, and then you can get a more accurate reading for that temperature. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to cover is I'm going to go ahead and go into the menu. I'm hitting the menu button on the steering wheel. I'm going to go ahead and go into information. And I'm going to start at the top here with tire pressure. Now this is a big one that a lot of people do not properly follow the way they should. And what I mean by that is, you will see, not just with the Maverick, but with other vehicles, that generally speaking, you should not be relying upon the tire pressure listed on your dash. So in my case, it says 37 for the two front tires, 36 for the two rear. That is probably pretty close to what it actually is right now, but I just drove home from work, so those tires are hotter. Also bear in mind that the greatest weight, because the bed is empty right now, the greatest weight on the tires is going to be the front tires, and this Maverick, even though it's an all-wheel drive, it runs most, if not all, of the power through the front wheels unless it senses that it needs to get more traction by opening up the all-wheel drive to include the rear wheels. So when you're steering with the front wheels, obviously you've got more weight also on the front wheels, and that's where the power is being put down. All of that is going to add more heat into the tires, and as I mentioned in one of my previous videos, when you have more heat in the tires, they are going to show a higher pressure naturally, because for every 10 degrees Fahrenheit you increase in temperature, you increase about 1 pound per square inch, or PSI, in pressure. So I always recommend letting your vehicle sit, if possible, overnight, but at the very least 2 hours to adjust to ambient temperatures for the tires, and then measure the actual temperature using a tire gauge that ideally has a digital readout like the AccuTire tire gauge that C.A.R.S Driver uses and that I use. All right, so that is the tire pressure. Now let's look at the oil life. Now the oil life says 82%, and that, I would say, is quite accurate. There are a whole list of parameters that the vehicle is looking at to give you that rating. In general, it tends to be things like how hot the oil gets at a certain engine speed, engine load, and perhaps ambient temperature. And if there is more friction, it's going to heat up faster, etc. So it can be pretty accurate. It can also, you know, from what I understand, take in how much mileage you've put in, and all of those factors get computed to give you a pretty good idea of what the oil life is. But that should not stop you from regularly checking your oil. In fact, in the most ideal situation, you'd be checking your oil every time you fuel up the gas tank. I don't do it that often myself, but I do check it fairly regularly. Some people also like to replace the engine oil as soon as the engine is broken in. Manufacturers generally for regular mainline passenger vehicles don't have that as a requirement. If you want to do it, great, all the better, I would say. But I just wanted to throw that out there as, hey, that's something that some people, some owners like to do. All right. So the next thing that I am going to cover is the mileage. MPG to be exact. And in this case, as I've spoken of before, it's showing 30.9 MPG. That is with normal mode, and that's for this particular trip. Since I last fueled up, I've only driven 115.3 miles. And the 30.9, I would say, from my experience, actually calculating the mileage driven divided by the gallons required to fuel up, with eliminating as many variables as possible, I would say this tends to be about 95% accurate on average. It tends to read higher, so I would say the actual gas mileage, if you take 30.9 and you subtract 5%, hence the 95% accuracy, I would say that gives you a pretty close idea. So that would be roughly 1.5 PSI, not PSI, that's for the pressure. That was, that was another readout. MPG, miles per gallon, 1.5 miles per gallon, less than that is what I would guess I'm getting right now. I would say it's been more accurate than that, to be more like 98% accurate, some fuel ups, but anyhow, that gives you an idea. So what's the point of all this? I would say just make sure you know your vehicle and that you know how to properly check the tire pressure, when to check the tire pressure, how to calculate your MPG. It's pretty straightforward. And also make sure you're checking your oil regularly. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching on C.A.R.S. and have a great weekend.